My name is Deborah Marcero, and I am an author and illustrator of children's books. I live in Michigan, and I've taught in Chicago Public Schools, and I've taught undergraduates at the University of Michigan, and now I'm teaching at the Vermont College of Fine Arts MFA program in writing for children. And I am a working writer right now, working on an early reader graphic novel series debut for the first time, and I'm really excited about that.
Welcome to the Picturebooking Podcast. Here's your author, illustrator, and host, Nick Patton.
Hey, Picturebook people. Thank you for listening to the show today. If you enjoy this episode, subscribe to Picturebooking on your podcast app and discover more at picturebooking.com. Now it's time to go inside the Mulville Library studio on the campus of St. Norbert College for today's talk. Enjoy. You're super interesting to me. Your work is super interesting to me.
Thank you.
It feels original to me. Today's book we're going to talk about In a Jar, that feels original. When I put that book, when we do story time in my family, we pile a bunch of books on the bed and then we go through and reread them. When this book is on the bed, it just stands out. It looks different. When we read it, it just feels different. It just, everything about it stands out as just a little bit different, a little bit original, something that I haven't seen before. And I just want to thank you for bringing something like this into my family. And, it's something where usually what happens is a book like this comes in and I'll say, I absolutely love this thing. This is great. And then my wife will be going, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I get it, but or the kids are like, the kids are just totally not into it. But this book has got everybody on board. So, that's a tough feat. That's a tough feat.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
So my curiosity with you in this book I should mention this too. I say this every once in a while. When I really, really like a book, sometimes you don't want to talk to the author about it. You sometimes just want it to be yours, right? I bring some of my stuff into a book like this. And, I don't know if I want to know anything about this book from the author, because I just think it's beautiful in itself. So to stall talking about this book, I thought we would talk a little bit about your backstory and about how you got here and how you got to develop yourself as an author, as a writer, as an artist, to create this unique voice that you have today. So to begin, I think I just want to ask you what your childhood was like. What were you interested in?
Yeah. Well, my childhood was, rural Michigan, growing up in farm country. We had 10 acres of land to just play. I have 4 brothers and 1 sister, and it was just a very simple life. My father was a teacher, an English teacher of high school, and my mom, she kind of grew a nursery, a greenhouse business on the property. So I had my hands in the dirt growing up. We kind of all pitched in. It was a small business, but it also helped put us all through college too. So I was very connected to the land and nature, and that's where I would play. We had a hillside, trees, a small pond, and just these kind of expansive fields in southern Michigan. And I fell in love with books. I would read and read and read. So my summer vacations were just filled with kind of wandering, playing with stones and reading books, climbing trees, and just playing with my siblings. So it was a quiet and expansive kind of childhood, I think.
Yeah, it really lets you, and I feel like as you're talking, images from your art just pop into my head about like these big fields of where somebody might say it's a big field of nothing. But the way your art is, I mean, no one would look at your art and say it's a big field of nothing, right? I mean, you've got tons of detail in it, but it shows the love for each inch of that expanse. Just the way you create it.
Yeah, I've always just connected very deeply with nature. I think the present moment is my favorite place to be. And I can't always be there, but I try to be there as much as I can. And I think the being in the beauty of nature, or watching the light change, or noticing certain smells or sounds, it just allows me to pause and stop. And I feel like that's the kind of the genesis of this book, because when you stop and you listen and you just take a breath, you're collecting something in a jar. You're collecting a moment. And I think growing up, I was also, I think, more quiet but in that quietness, I would just take in the world. And I think that in this book, the chance to kind of give those breathing spaces in these expansive spreads of color and little details, and then take you into a smaller moment in a smaller frame, is very much kind of this kind of bringing you into the world and then letting it breathe and be a bigger part kind of around you. So I don't know, I'm hoping that the reader can also just feel like they're pausing.
It's so interesting that when you were talking about being in the moment, and I was just thinking through my experiences of when I'm most in the moment and how much you love nature. It's just so much easier to get in that space when you're outside, when you're not in a box, when the world is all around you, when the dirt is under your feet and the wind is in your face and sunlight's moving across the sky. I mean, that's just it's so much easier. And I just think to myself that you just have to be out there more. And in those memories, like this book, and maybe we should just talk a little bit about, just introduce this book before we dive into like every little aspect of it. But it's such a, the idea of collecting that, of just taking a moment to see how beautiful it is, and then to have something to remember that by, so that when you have a moment where you're not, in that perfect setting, that you can still use your memory. You still have that as part of your life and your experience, that you can still enjoy that and have that experience again. I just think that's so profound and such a great way to live a life.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the foundation of this basic idea that that sprung forth in my reading when I was in college. So my undergraduate was actually a bachelor's degree in fine art in graphic. So drawing, photography, printmaking, and I did a little bit of poetry there, but I did a ton of reading. And one of the books that I read that made a real impact in me, that shows up in the background of the idea of this book, was 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And the idea of magical realism that he created in that story, because I thought, as an illustrator, could I do that in my drawings? Could I make this sense of what feels, this kind of fictional sense of, you open a jar and the leaves could fall around you in the room again. It might not literally happen, but if the memory is there and it triggers that and it feels like you re-enter that experience somehow, then actually, yes, it could feel and look like that. So I was kind of tapping into these ideas of how I could play with that in my illustration, and having the kind of the drawing and the background and the pencil kind of work, kind of re-enter my work at this stage. You know, when I entered my work, when I was doing my bachelor's degree, it was in life drawing, you know, drawing the model and kind of pulling it in and kind of crafting these stories that are whimsical and for kids just feels like that's where my heart is. I think I was struggling for years about how do I become an artist in the world? How do I become a writer in the world? And it wasn't until probably about 10 years ago that I made the decision that this land of Kid Lit was where I was meant to be, and that I knew that. And it was just, you know, making that decision to move forward inside of that. Before that, I did pursue an MFA in poetry where I studied language, and I love that and lyrical language and lyrical poetry. And I love that in a jar, I got to really play with that, in the text, because my secret wish is to just put poetry and art into the hands of children and the adults who read to them. Like it was just like my mission statement and my vision, as soon as I took on this idea of wanting to become a writer and illustrator for children.
That's super interesting. So you got your undergrad, you were studying visuals.
That's right.
And then you graduate from your undergrad and you were doing lots of reading and you said you were doing some writing. Mm-hmm. And the decision to get a master's in poetry was what, so just talk me through that. Were you, looking at it from afar, you say, okay, this person spent their undergrad working on visuals. They spent their master's working on the words. This person was born to be, this was their ultimate goal right from the beginning. They had this real plan. I'm going to treat this like a doctor. I'm going to spend 8 years. I'm going to spend studying this stuff. Was that, I imagine that it wasn't as conscious, or even when you were doing the visuals, when you were in the undergrad, were you thinking that this was your calling?
No, not at all. Only in retrospect do I see the dots and how they connect, but a lot of it was mysterious at the time. In my undergrad, text would show up in my drawings and my visuals, and in graduate school, drawings would show up in my text and my poems and my essays. And they were integrated, but it was more adult themes and kind of like curiosities at the time about the world. And it wasn't geared for children. But when I was a child, what I would do when I would play. So you imagine, I think when children play, it's the key to their talent. It's the key to their passion. So whenever I had a quiet moment, I would draw and I would write. So I would take crayons and pencils and I would have this pad of paper and I would write little poems and I would illustrate them. I would just draw these little drawings. And that's what I would do when I was 7 or 8 on a summer day for fun. And I think looking back, I see now that was just the insight. And then in high school, I did this independent project called Written and Illustrated By, and it was just for a contest. It wasn't for credit. It was just this speaker came into my high school, presented this as like a challenge. And I thought, wow, that sounds really fun. I think I want to do that, but it's on my own time. So I took all of spring break and I wrote a book and I illustrated it. I submitted it. It was honorable mention in this national contest, but it's a terrible book. I look back now, but it was my desire, my passion, my investment, my just excitement by the idea of doing that. But it was never like, oh, that's what I want to be. That's what I want to do, when I was 18. In my 20s, I thought, oh, I wonder how to do that, because the path to being a writer and illustrator, everyone's path is so different. It's not like a path to become a lawyer where it's so direct and you have to do A, B, and C, and D. Becoming an author and illustrator, everyone has their own journey. So my journey was just, and then after that, just questioning, how do I want to be an artist and writer in the world? And then how do I make a living? In the meantime, how do I support myself financially and yet do the work that I love? I mean, that was just a constant question through my 20s and 30s. And when I was teaching, it took me too much away from my creative self, but there is that part of me that's still a teacher. So it just looking back now on the scope of my life, I see all the dots, but they really didn't all connect until all of a sudden I started making books. And now I see I have a small body of work, and I've just my first book deal was maybe 2015. And now I'm working on my 10th, 11th, 12th book. So it feels like, of course, that's who I am and what I'm doing. But it's also a dream life that part of me didn't wonder if it could be possible. So that, I think that's I didn't know until I knew. And then everything started clicking into place. So.
When was there a moment? Was there a time period where it really started to click for you that there's a moment where you're saying that you write and you draw, but you don't really have that vehicle of children's books yet. When did that happen? When did you say, wait a second, was there a moment like that?
There was, I think there was a moment that it really peaked in me as I was in Chicago Public Schools and I was the lead literacy teacher, and I was leading an after school enrichment program called Young Authors. And my 5th and 6th graders were sitting around me and we were going over these projects that they could do. And what their assignment was to write and illustrate a picture book. And as I'm teaching this to them and they're getting excited, I'm getting excited, I thought, wait a second, I think that's what I want to do. I don't want to be, I want to be in it. I can be teaching, but I want to be in it. And then at that moment, I think it was 2009, I searched for some kind of class. So there was a community art class, or I guess a community class in Chicago, where I was living at the time. And Esther Hirschenhorn, who was a teaching writer, did a community class there for picture books. And I took that class. I showed her some of my art, and she took me aside after one of the meetings, and she said, Deborah, I think you're the real deal. So it was this I think I want it. I think I have it. And then I had a mentor say and look at me and said, if you want to pursue this, you can. And it kind of gave me the permission to imagine that I could actually break in. And then in the next couple of years, I was taking more classes, kind of trying, working on a dummy over and over. And in early 2013, I went to my first conference, bigger conference for SCBWI. It was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and there were about 300 attendees. And then I got to hear from art directors, agents, editors, and everything they were asking for. I could see what I wasn't doing, but I knew that I could do it. And I made the decision then that no matter how long it took, that this was the work that I wanted to do.
Yeah, that's so special. And so during that time, you're still teaching. You've decided that, but in your are you still teaching? I should ask that question. Is this already?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, in 2010, there were job cuts at my school, and I used it as an opportunity to go in a more creative direction. So I started a photography company having in mind that I could have more time for the writing and illustration without having to lean on it to make a living.
Yeah. That's great. That's exciting because you had the opportunity to say, okay, now I'm no longer in that position. So how do I build my life so that I can have the time to do the work that I need that maybe isn't going to pay me right now?
That's right.
But is going to enrich me and make me a better person. That's so great. I love that. I think that's so special that you had that moment where you got to decide, how to structure your life so that you could fit this in.
Yeah, I decided that it was the most important thing. And so how do I craft a life to give this a real chance? And just worked and revised and worked and revised and worked and revised and just honing in on craft and ideas as much as I could, thinking that I'm only going to learn from each project that fails.
And so when you're building that up, are you, this might be too specific, but I don't care. Are you fleshing out full stories? Are we doing dummy books? Are we doing dummy books and then we're working on solo illustrations on the side? Are we doing writing without, how are you tackling this big, huge project?
Yeah. So I'm trying to write picture books and illustrate them. I came up with an early middle grade kind of chapter book idea that was heavily illustrated, and I still love it. I haven't sold it yet, but it was a proposal that got me an agent and interest from agents. But then it was just writing a picture book, dummying it out, making a couple of art samples, because I learned that that's what a proposal is to an editor to sell a book, is the full dummy sketches, especially breaking in. You need to show that you know exactly kind of how you're going to pace the story out in the images and the text. So I would usually write, illustrate, and then do a couple of final illustrations. But all of this work is just, you never know if it's going to go anywhere or not. And so it basically it's for the sake of my own learning. And I had critique groups that I would share with and learn from, but it was all just kind of looking at, I want to study these. I want to make something powerful to put into the hands of children. And I have to write and not be worried that it's going to be perfect every time. I wrote a lot of them that didn't sell or didn't get past my agent or didn't get me an agent. It was just, I have to, try another story. And that's the thing that even today, I think all it is there's just another idea waiting out there that is going to be a compelling story that wants to be made. There's always another story to kind of grab and pull together through me. So the blank page is not an intimidating place. And it's just that I can always turn it and there'll be another blank one tomorrow. If the one that I'm sketching out today isn't quite working.
Yeah. So ideas. So how it sounds like to me that ideas are coming to you. You feel like you're just open to these things. Is there a process that you're going through? Are you doing brainstorming? What does the beginning of an idea look like in your world?
So my ideas kind of come from a lot of different places. It feels like for In a Jar specifically, it's a lot of different pieces of my life and experience kind of come together through this book. So, the idea of in 2014, I started journaling in jars. So like instead of like saying, this is what happened today, I draw a little jar and then draw, a tiny little, like if I was in New York City, it would just be, Fifth Avenue, and I was having a little cappuccino on the corner. I would draw that and then kind of give it a little label. So I started kind of thinking in these little, I just like, this is such a compelling, strange thing to do. Let me just start doing it. And then, there's the magical realism from 100 Years of Solitude. And then, thinking about, I love this idea that came up for me when studying Dickinson, the themes of absence as presence. So when, that if someone leaves or you move away, that there's it's not that just that they're gone. It's like there's this missing, there's this feeling and this sense that they're still a part of you even though they're not there, that I really love and gravitated to in her poems. And I love jars. I collect things. The rabbits themselves are very meaningful to me because I've always loved rabbits. I was born in the year of the rabbit. Velveteen Rabbit was one of my favorite childhood stories. I had a pet rabbit. We nicknamed the dirt road that I grew up on the Bunny Road because at dusk there were just rabbits everywhere bouncing around. So this book kind of comes together through all of these little kind of pieces. And then just in my life, I've lived a nomadic life. So I've had to move away quite a bit. And that sense of loss, yet maintaining connection is such a part of my experience. And I think a big experience of just a normal everyday family these days as well, having friends move away or them having to move away themselves, and the connection is still there because you shared a part of your lives together. So you're kind of always part of each other's lives and no one can ever take that away from you. So there's kind of all of these things and then that kind of come together through me into a narrative arc, in 40 pages, that feels like a poem in and of itself. So I think that for whenever I come up with a new idea, it's always kind of these little broken pieces coming together through me that I just get to assemble. And I ask, where is the heart of this? Where is the heart of the story? So there's a sense of discovery in it for me too. Early in this, picture book in a jar, it was more about being in a hurry and wanting to be present because there was just this sense of hurriedness and stress that in our everyday lives that prevent us from being present. But it wasn't quite there. I didn't quite get to that heart until I actually set the words down and I drew it as a wordless picture book. So I got the words out of the way to find the story, and I actually sat down for 3 weeks, and this was around 2016, and I just drew it. No words. I'm like, what is the story here? And I found it. I found it by drawing it through the seasons, through the friendship, through the sense of loss, and yet still having this resilience and hope and connection in the end. And of course, when I submitted it, I had a lot of editors very interested, but each of them said, can you write some words to this? They said, we love it. It's kind of mysterious. Can you write some words? And I think, but because I had found the story, whenever I get a question from an editor or director, I always go back to that sense of like, will this make it better? And honestly, like separate myself from everything, ask myself that hard question. And if the answer is maybe or yes, I try. So my thought was, it might make it better. I don't know. Let me try. But within a few days, because I had the story and I thought all I have to do is write a little bit of lyrical grounding in words to kind of move the reader through the story, I wrote it within a few days. And I think 3 weeks later it sold as this wordless picture book with this little sparse text. And then we got to work kind of combining the two after it sold.
That's amazing. I love, it sounds like, it's almost like you're just making soup, right? You've got all these ingredients, right? And you're just like,
yes.
You're like, you look at your entire life and you're like, what is the core of this thing that I want to make? Well, this kind of relates to that and that kind of relates to that. Let's see what happens when I put those things together. And I really remember those bunnies. I mean, I really think that would be an interesting, and then you just, it's a soup, it's a puzzle, it's all coming together. And I love the fact that you tried writing this and then it didn't, that visually, I find that clears my head when I do the drawings and just tell the story visually. And it seems like I lose a lot of the writing part of it, and it's easier to come back, and to figure out if it needs words. And you hear it, you see it both ways where, you write, sometimes it's easier to write the story and then go back and do the art. But, I think that's a fabulous way of working. Is this something completely unique to this book specifically? The fact that you were doing the visuals first?
Yes, I would say for the entirety of the story, yes. Traditionally, I at least visually find my characters. So I kind of know what they look like as I kind of move. And then I want to try to find a strong draft in a manuscript. Maybe I'll draw something out here or there, but I like to pace it out usually just in the text so that when I go to the page and the page breaks, everything makes sense for me to kind of stand on as an illustrator. That's my usual process. So this was very different, but I think by getting the words out of the way when I was struggling so much because I was like, it's here, but where is it? Mm. Let me get the words out of the way. It was a different way of creating a book for me. That kind of surprised me. And it literally just drew it.
And it's like, it almost reminds me of, I've had people tell me that they've gone to a different country and, they've learned the language and then they've learned Spanish, they go to Spain, and and when they speak Spanish, they feel like they're almost a different person. Their personality, because they're translating so much, they get to see things in like this really unique way. And, maybe it's a lot harder. But I feel like that's what you're doing here, where you're like, you try to communicate one way and you're like, well, I just think the story's still there. I just got to find it. I just got to try communicating in a completely different way, and it'll just completely shift. My whole focus is going to shift when I just focus on the visuals. And it's just like, in art school, they tell you, to step away from your drawing. So you're not so close to it, or your painting, or to turn it upside down, or to do all these things. And you're doing that with a story. You're like, okay, let me turn the story upside down and see if that fixes. I see things that are broken then, or you seem like you're playing with it in a way that's to find the core of what was truly here.
Yeah, it's true. And I still have a few projects on the back burner that have kind of I feel like because within a jar, there was something so compelling that didn't, have me throwing it in the wastebasket, that there was something there that I needed to find and bring out that wasn't quite working. And I have a couple of projects like that on the back burner that I hope that I can find that too. But it's a sweet spot when you find it. And when you find it, you feel it. And then when you feel it, you know it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. This book, we've kind of talked around it, but this book has got it's about a friendship. For me, it's about friendship. It's about childhood friendship, and I feel like, and childhood memories. And I feel like those things, childhood memories, childhood experiences, childhood friendships, they're all so intense. When I think about mine, I think about those days where you're with your friend and the whole world falls away and it's just you and your friend and you're having this experience and it all just seems for me, it just seems so intense. It seems so, like I just don't have, it's hard to have experiences like that as an adult and the everyday repetition of life. But as a kid, you sort of fall into it, and a day could feel like forever. And I feel like this book, the art in this book, the words in this book kind of capture that magic. So I think how do you think? I mean, how do you think about, childhood memories and friendships as it related to you telling this story?
Well, I love the back cover of this book and what the designers and I kind of came to by just stating simply that friendship is magic. And I think that the heart of this for me is that, when you're a kid, there's always that sense of, for me, especially being a little more quiet, like, where do I fit in? Who do I trust? Who can I be myself with? And then finding that one or two friends in my school, and then, just getting lost in this feeling of being able to be yourself with someone else. And the beauty of kind of just that best friend that, like Llewellyn and Evelyn, they find each other because they're just there at the same time in the same place. And so often in childhood, that's all it is you're just, two beings in the same place in the same time. And then there's some kind of connection, and that everything you've done before by yourself that's maybe been fun or special, then all of a sudden when you have someone to share it with, it just amplifies all of those feelings. There's through the shared experience, even if it's just giggling over popcorn or, getting to go somewhere with someone and kind of sharing the excitement or joy of just sharing time together. I think that the heart of this book is just that difference between, I'm taking in this beautiful moment, whatever it is. And then what is it like to share it with somebody? And somehow that moment is bigger. And it's just, I think, we as human beings are just, we long for connection, and that what that connection brings just kind of adds all this depth and meaning to just little things in our lives. Yeah.
And this book does that beautifully, where you see the joy of doing this one thing, one person doing this one thing, but then when you get two people together, it just explodes into something that could never have been imagined by just one mind. And that's beautiful. Can you just talk a little bit about the visual development of this world and the story? And because this came first, so just talk a little bit about how you went about discovering this world.
So a lot of it came from just this sense of, I guess, it was inside like the delicate lines of the pencil, but also wanting to feel like rich and vibrant through the watercolor. So combining those two loves of mediums of mine. So like in the first spread, Llewellyn was a collector. He collected things in jars. This idea of leaving kind of blank space where the birches are, blank space where Llewellyn is, and then all of these little lines, and then this rich yellows and golds kind of feeling to kind of create this feeling of whimsy and wonder through just these tiny little dancing marks that kind of ideally disappear. You don't see them as pencil first. You read them as the trees and the walkway, but then they're kind of vibrating a little bit in the background that gives it this kind of like energy of, this landscape is alive. And I think kind of using the washes and blending the colors in, from the night sky and the meteor shower to the murmurations of starlings on, in the sunrise, or, so then I got to kind of have this like kind of intensity of color while also having this kind of dancing little movements in the pencil, while also having these sweet cartoon, very simple bunny characters that pop in the setting. So I never wanted them to get lost. And I thought, how do I not let them get lost in these intricate flower tulip fields? It's contrast, and just the simple contrast of, they're just these little white, silhouettes, and their forms can be super simple. And then they read without any effort at all. And you zoom in on them immediately. So I got to kind of play with that, the figure ground in this playful way through their simple forms, and then still able to use this kind of penetrating color with the delicate line work. So I had to try a couple of different kind of approaches to find this balance between line work, color, and then the figures themselves.
Yeah. And that was, obviously it was the right call for those bunnies, but to have, such intense scenes with so much going on, and then just, you're not even doing pencil lines on, most of the time, you're not even doing pencil lines on the bunnies. They're just right. White. They're just white, and they just, they pop out so much, and they're so distinctive. And as you're constantly thinking as an artist, so what do you want people to see first in your image?
Right.
What do you want people to see second? And how, in your head, when I just think about your work and the work here, you're thinking, how the heck are you going to pull that off with all that detail? And you've got contrast and you've got color and they're bright. But those bunnies and their emotion are the first things you see. And then, but then the explosion of the world around it is, it's fabulous. It's beautiful. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
But so what's, I got a couple last questions for you.
Okay.
What's next for you?
What's next? I am actually working on an emerging reader graphic novel series that I'll be the author and illustrator on, with Macmillan Roaring Brook. It just announced actually a few days ago, so I'm excited to be able to share that with you, called Haley and Comet. And it's about a little girl and an interstellar friendship with a comet. And so I pitched it as E.T. meets Frog and Toad. So it was just, I wanted to have this kind of otherworldly friendship where the comet or the E.T. character didn't have to go away in the end, and they can have an infinite amount of adventures. So, and as you can see from In a Jar, I'm starting to tell stories in frames. There are these little boxes to kind of highlight emotional beats to keep the reader moving and reading just in a visual way. So it just was this natural way that I started thinking. So kind of attempting this new format of the graphic literary for this emerging reader is so exciting. So, it's going to be 3 books, and hopefully number 1 will come out in the winter of 2021.
Very cool. Very cool. How exciting.
Thank you.
So final question. What's been the best moment of this picture book life?
The best moment of this picture book life is waking up every morning and realizing that this is what I get to do with my day. It really feels like that I just wake up excited thinking that if I get to craft and draw and write stories for children that's my puzzle. That's my quest. That's my labor. It's just a labor of love that is, I wake up finding a little bit of disbelief and joy at the same moment for sake of being able to do this work.
Thank you for listening to the show today. If you enjoy this episode, subscribe to Picturebooking on your podcast app and discover more at picturebooking.com.
Bye-bye, bye-bye.